Hey, hey. Welcome back to Zoom Back Camera, everybody, the virtual Browning Cinema Film Forum. And, sorry, I might have a little bit of echo, one moment here. And in order to get us started, we have something we like to say here at the beginning of Zoom Back Camera. And I like to read it in order to make sure that I do get it right. During these uncertain times that have moved us out of the physical Browning cinema and into a virtual one, our thoughts are with those battling the virus, battling isolation, battling precarity, and battling the fear inherent to this moment. And alongside that, we want to extend our thanks and appreciation to the first responders, medical professionals, grocers, public transit workers, childcare workers, and anyone else on the front lines. Zoom Back Camera is a small thing to offer, but we do hope these conversations about movies we love will buoy your day and continue the education, fellowship, and dialogue with which we bracket our films in the Browning cinema. Also in the Browning cinema, we like to say hello prior to film, so feel free to say, make comments in the chat and make your presence known. Now, getting to our guest and guest curator, we have Dionne Bremyer. Hello, Dionne.
Hi, Ricky. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thank you for being on the show, Professor Bremyer. How about you tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do and where you do it?
Okay. Well, I am an associate professor of English at the University of West Georgia in Carrollton, Georgia. And I teach primarily creative writing and also multi-ethnic lit. But my background is kind of in communications, which was my major as an undergrad. So I came to film that way. And I'm also toying with the idea of starting to work on a screenplay.
Oh, I bet it's been rattling around for a little bit.
A little while.
Oh, that's great. Well, what made you want to be a writer? Because you're not just a professor, you're a practitioner, and an amazing one, by the way. Along with that, where can people find your work?
Well, some online, but I'll make a big plug for my book, which is coming out in February 2021. It's called Quint, and it's coming out with 713 Press. So I know it's about a year away, but I'm really excited about it. So I feel like I have to plug it every chance I get.
Ah, that's great. Looking forward to it. And why? How did you end up coming into writing?
I think I just always liked stories. I liked movies. I liked books. I just am really drawn to narrative, and I actually feel just like narrative is our most fundamental human experience. I mean, we love stories. Like we thrive on stories. We need stories to live. They help, explain the world around us. They help us understand the world. They help us make sense of it. And there's lots of history, right, of humans needing stories to survive and thrive and move forward. So that's, I guess it's not a unique answer for me, but it's I love stories and telling them and sharing them.
And talking about how stories are needed in certain times. Well, you picked a really irrelevant one with Soylent Green for us to watch.
It's not related to anything that's happening in the world right now at all.
What were your first memories of seeing it? And by the way, we like to also ask for people who might be chatting along, have you seen the film before? Was this your first screening? But do you have a memory of your first screening?
Yeah, I first saw it in college. Like I said, it was a comm major, and I accidentally signed up for sci-fi film. It was just one of those special topics classes, and it was, back in the pre-internet registration days. So I was like, special topics in communication. We'll see what it was. And the special topic was sci-fi film, which I had absolutely no interest in. I got kicked out of class the first day because I had not seen Star Wars, because that was like back in the day when you could kick students out of class. So I got kicked out of class.
So they just said leave?
Oh no, my professor was like, you haven't seen it. You can get up and go. And I laughed, as did the rest of the class. And then he was like, no, I was serious. Get your things and go. You can come back when you've seen Star Wars. And
That matches my like 5th grade conception of what college was going to be.
Exactly, right? It was totally on brand for what I thought college was going to be. So I, like a fool, didn't watch it and came back to class, and he was like, "Did you watch it yet?" And I said no, and he was like, "I'll see you later when you've watched Star Wars." So
And yet you didn't choose Star Wars for us to watch.
I did not. I have a 5-year-old, and I cannot tell you, it's like some kind of karmic retribution. I've had to watch Star Wars. So yeah, I mean, I wasn't terribly interested in sci-fi film, but that class ended up being amazing. And I kind of heard the line Soylent Green is people, but I didn't have sort of a frame of reference for what it was. And so I was really blown away when I saw it in this class, and just, thought it was such an interesting film. And it's one of those films that, 20 some odd years later still sticks with me.
Nice. So we'll go ahead and hop into it. First of all, as an intro in, I found Film Quarterly, which is a very important publication in the world of film. Film Quarterly's review in 1973 begins, "This is an interesting bad movie." And I think that's the most glowing review you could give this movie.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, a very fair review.
On point. So we get the opening credits, and I love when science fiction wastes no time. And this gets us to NYC 2022 very quickly. But before then, there is this kind of PSA at the beginning, the opening credits. What did that evoke for you? Like as a real PSA, like what was it saying for you in the time or now?
Doesn't it remind you of those, with the crying First Nations person commercials that they used to have in the 70s about like pollution? And I feel like it's sort of in that same like feeling of those commercials. And I don't know. I mean, it's so disheartening to see. I mean, it's like just these horrible scenes of pollution and devastation, and all of it, wrought by the hands of man and technology and progress, and it really makes the world look like a miserable place. It's terribly sad.
And at the front, it's interesting when you get dystopian works, there is like a utopia part to it, right?
Right.
And for this, it's that the intro before we get to New York is almost like a Cheers intro.
Yeah.
Which makes me cry when I watch Cheers. So I cried already at the beginning of Soylent Green. I was just like, ooh.
Well, do you know the problem with it too is it's like, hey, these were the good times. We still had fresh food then, when we just polluted waterways with impunity, I mean, that's kind of, I guess that's what's kind of sad about it, right? I mean, it's really bleak looking, but it's almost meant to be like the good old days, right? When we didn't realize how much damage we were doing to the planet.
It's still okay mass production in some ways, or but like it's just leading it to its natural, like, capitalism will eat itself, which it ends up doing. And
Literally, right.
Set that off right at the beginning, which just wallop you, get you going.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And then we very quickly get a time and a place and a population. Very rare that, you're often told New York year 2022. Rarely do you get a population along with it. And I mean, the only other way you normally get it in a small town in like a horror film, like you're entering.
Right. And so it's online and yeah.
But we get 40 million, which I did a brief amount of Googling. Tokyo's urban area is currently 38.5 million. New York Metro is 21 million. And just in terms of how overpopulation is going to be running in this film, and like I mean, because they front load, I'm curious how your thoughts, how it's going to shape what we're going to be watching.
I think that like you are just sort of confronted with, the problem right away. It's like when you teach short story writing, we always talk about starting in media res, right? You got to put yourself right in the center of the conflict and there's no buildup, right? And this movie absolutely does that, right? It's like, here's the problem. There's 40 million people in New York City, right? And I think right away, before you see any of the sort of things that unravel from that particular moment, you're like, what? 40 million people in New York City? That's insane, right? How are they going to eat? How are they going to live? Where are they going to sleep, right? So before the movies opened at all, you're already like, your sense of panic is sort of heightened, which I think kind of works well, right, in a sci-fi movie in terms of thinking about not the sort of glorious future that we might be in where 40 million people can live happily and comfortably in New York City. But right away you feel that, well, I know the size of New York, 40 million people can't live there. So right away it sort of throws you off balance, right? And you get this kind of haze over everything too, which is a kind of toxic green that lets you know things are not going well. And I don't know, I like that as a device in a way. I think sometimes in sci-fi movies, that sort of pinning us in place can feel like too self-conscious, like they try to make it happen maybe organically through the story. I'll make a bad reference, but one for my sci-fi film class too is like, I always talk about Demolition Man, which is a terrible movie, but that
Well, I got my guy frozen in.
it's such a weird movie because they get so specific, right? Like there's the toilet with the 3 shells and like every restaurant is Taco Bell. And like, it's so much that you're like, okay, this doesn't feel like anything that could really possibly, as much as I love Taco Bell, doesn't feel like anything that could possibly happen, right? Whereas like, this is not like sort of like, here's what's happened, there's been a disaster. It's just, we're in there. Like, here's the time, here's the place, here's the conflict. There's 40 million people here.
Yeah, and I mean, in Soylent Green's favor, they don't have to do that much world building. They just do world deconstructing,
Right.
and just give you little pieces of here's what corporations are. And that's where, yeah, sci-fi gets so bogged down in, ooh, let me give you these footnotes, and it's
Right.
the lessons learned from Star Wars. Yeah.
Totally. I have to explain to you how we got from wherever you are now to this future world. And I actually don't need that. I'm like, just throw me in, I'm gonna go with you wherever you need to go.
Totally. And where we need to go is to the apartment of Detective Thorne and Saul, Professor Saul. So thoughts on these two men with no backstory as to why they live and cook and laugh and cry together and profess love for one another?
I have a theory.
It's a very it's a male bonding relationship that would need to be explained today, I think.
Absolutely. But it's one of the things I like about this movie. It kind of just unfolds in context why they live together and what they're doing together. And I love that, I'd totally forgotten it until I rewatched it, that was Edward G. Robinson, which is so cool, right? That there's somebody who has this history in noir, right? As we get into this like contemporary noir, he's just kind of tossed in there as like a hint to that genre, right? Early on. And I don't know, I love their relationship. I find it really charming. And I love that, they live together in such a small space, but there's none of the like, you're in my way, move out of my way, or like, it just seems very natural that they live in this very small space together. Although if in 2 years I'm pedaling a bicycle for electricity, I'll know that graduate school was not in my best interest.
Crack out the Peloton. It's
Yeah.
gonna...
Look, if that's the case, those people, the Peloton wife is going to be at the top and
Yeah.
foremost of our society. So,
and it's in talking about how they build New York, and this is a backlot picture. We don't get expansive shots. And thinking about Charlton Heston, we don't even get like a Statue of Liberty to say like, we're in New York City, and that helps with the claustrophobia in some ways, and just like you can't place it.
Right.
But did it feel New York City to you? Did it feel like a time and place?
No, and I actually like that about it too. I'm talking about Demolition Man way more than I had planned to. I don't
Roll with
know.
it.
I've gone,
I love it.
I've like fallen down that particular rabbit hole. But in Demolition Man, again, like I don't remember what city it's set in. I think it's LA, but you know, it's again sort of very futuristic looking. And I like that this kind of looks like something that would be recognizable, right? The dress is a little, you know, communist, but they're not like any jackets with like 50 zippers on it or head to toe bodysuits, or you know, they look like regular clothes, you know. And I would say probably for some people who live in New York City, that probably feels about the size of some New York City apartments, depending on like what rents are. But the other thing it kind of reminded me of too was, and I guess this kind of goes back to the communist sort of look of it, is like the second half of Dr. Zhivago after the war. Do you remember they have all the people like living in the house, right? And they're sort of confined to these tiny rooms. And it felt like very reminiscent of that to me. Like I was like, oh, something about this, not just the dress, but something about this like space and the number of people sort of inhabiting a space, you know, makes me think that, okay, maybe there is the sort of mass poverty creates this somehow more egalitarian society in some ways, or at least widens the gap between the very, very rich and everyone else.
Mm-hmm. Well, on the very rich side of things, we very quickly are introduced to Simonson's apartment, and Miss Sherrill jamming on Space Command, which is an actual game. I think it was like one of the first like arcade type games. So, are you a gamer yourself?
I am not at all. So I'm just
If you had one arcade game to ride this out in your house, which one would you choose?
gosh, Tetris.
Yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah. Keep it simple.
keep it simple. Like
Yeah, give it no end. And we meet Simonson, Joseph Cotton, in a later role for him, a blue velvet suit, white ascot, on board, 1000%. And the apartment itself is just, I loved seeing it.
okay. Feel like they got everything in the apartment totally right. I mean, it feels like
Yeah, everything we need, everything we want.
I know it was like modernist, clean lines, everything's white. Like I was like, that feels like somebody's, you know, Pinterest aspiration page. Like,
Yeah, it does. Like sieve through like the Clockwork Orange house.
it's like a mashup of those two things.
I would love to see a Pinterest Clockwork Orange. See how the sister-in-laws do with that one. And the domestic space is soon invaded by one of the sweetest hitmen ever.
Just a baby face on him. I mean, you just love him. How could you not?
And he is chewing that scenery. He's crowbarring that scenery.
Totally.
He is giving you so much cat burglar movement.
Yeah. He looks like he was like, you know, trained with Bob Fosse and then like went and auditioned for Soylent Green. He was like, look, I've got 5 years under Fosse. I'd like to try out.
And then we get one of the more, I mean, that was a really unique murder for me. Did it, like, how did it register for you?
Yeah, I don't know. I was gonna kind of ask you the same thing because it's such a I don't know if I've seen another death scene like that where it's like there's so much conversation about like, here's why I'm here to kill you. I'm kind of, you know, I'm not me specifically sorry, but the people who I'm here to kill you or would like to say they're sorry for this thing. And he's kind of like, well, knew it was coming. Like, you know, I mean, it's so there's no high drama in it. I mean, it's the most like quiet murder scene I've maybe ever seen. And even the sort of act of the murder itself is, I don't know, it's not gory, it's not slashery, it's not played for, I felt like just the gore of that particular moment.
I think that's what kind of shook me a little bit, is that it is so sweet, and then it is a violent murder, and you expect they'll just cut away, but they actually do show Simonson. I was like, oh, okay. We went back the other direction pretty quickly.
Yeah, I
And
thought they were just gonna do like the arm raise and then like come down, but
no, we see the follow through.
Oh yeah.
And I wonder, I mean, this is one of those, when it was out in cinemas at the time, I mean, Joseph Cotten would have been still a big, I wonder if there was kind of a Janet Leigh Psycho thing where like, oh, they're whacking him early. Like, I wasn't expecting that. I was surprised, at least. I thought he'd get a little more screen time or come back as a ghost or something.
He's got probably less than 5 minutes on the screen, and it's all like sad eyes, life, like sad sack. Like.
Well, and resignation toward death, once you know about the Soylent Green, is something that he's not alone, we'll find out.
No, and I kind of, I wonder, and I guess I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but like,
Go for it.
I guess that, that's sort of the thing. It's like once people seem to know about this, there's like a abject hopelessness, and it seems to me they're living in a pretty hopeless world already, so it seems interesting that like that's the thing that sort of seems to break them.
Yeah, 30 people on a staircase isn't doing it.
Nope. No problem with that, just step over them. Right.
Then we see Detective Thorne on the case, and he's really, I mean, he's at some of his highest like film noir detective when we first meet him, down to like the vice of the Vice Squad, stealing and swigging the bourbon.
Right.
Raises the question, if you got one liquor during the Prohibition days of Soylent Green that you got to steal from a murdered corporate chairperson's swank apartment, which booze do you choose?
Vodka, without a question, vodka.
Okay.
As well with everything.
It goes with a green, it goes with a red, it goes with a pink.
You put a little Soylent wafer into it. I think the stuff he stole from there is fascinating too, and that to me was like just another one of those great little details that was like showed sort of the abject state. Like liquor sort of seems like a luxury item, like even now, right? It's kind of a luxury item, right, depending on where you are in life. And but soap, right? Like that's not generally something we steal. One like really anemic looking celery stalk, 2 tomatoes. I mean, a really sad looking piece of meat, that God knows when it died, but like.
And the high-end pencils.
Right, the high-end and new paper.
Yeah, and evidence. Like he's still doing his job,
Right. Well, even that, like a reference book, right? And I think that's one of the things that's interesting in this movie, right? Of course, it doesn't anticipate some of the upcoming technology in much of a way, or at all, really. There's not a ton of technology in this film.
Space Command's about what you're gonna get.
Yeah, right. Like there's not much else there, except for the the assisted suicide place, which feels a little bit like a ride at Disney World, but we can talk about that when we get to it.
I just feel like some of them.
But there's no there's obviously no internet or anything like that, but these beautiful big like glossy reference books that he takes from the apartment, right, that he gives to Saul, and that Saul's like position is book, is sort of fascinating too, and that he's a professor, right? The idea that knowledge is going to reside in humans, right? There's not this sort of alternate place to look for knowledge. Human beings are sort of the last realm of knowledge being passed from one generation to another, as these books are very rare, right?
That's it. That's interesting to bring up, how the information is then later disseminated too.
Right.
like no one's writing it down and like sharing it.
Well, and I don't remember who oh, it's the bodyguard. He asks when he goes to investigate the murder. He says, "Can you write?" Which again, was something really interesting to me. So literacy in some way, shape, or form has fallen away.
Yeah, the bodyguard, Chuck Connors playing Tab Fielding, has a real Willem Dafoe, Lady Diane vibe to him. And none of the heavies in this movie seem to be intimidating. Like, which is interesting I mean, maybe it's the like the newsboy hats that they're in, but no one's like a physical menace in this movie, I don't think.
Here's my theory on that, which I think is very apropos of this moment. The people who are running things and in charge and driving things into the ground are old white men. And like, they don't have to be big hulking people. They do it in other ways by like disenfranchising people, keeping services and money from people. I mean, and so I like that movie, like that sort of choice in the movie that like, is it the governor Santini, is very like, unassuming, tiny, right?
Has an actual, and this is no comment on the politician, but looks like Bloomberg.
Oh, totally. In a really, really awesome page boy cap. Maybe that would have worked out better for Bloomberg had he gotten the page boy hat. I mean,
styling. So after Simonson's been taken away, I did want to ask you, because this is something that I didn't get. Did you kind of get a handle on the token bribe economy, or is it just like favors are being passed around, whatever?
Yeah, I don't really understand. Like there was that implication, right, when they come to get the body, like, you owe me, but I wasn't sure like what was owed or how it was owed or what was, being exchanged or what, like there seems to be this idea of illicit things changing hands, but I think I don't know. What did you think? I feel like it's one of the holes in the movie, maybe.
I figured it was just why I didn't get it. My first watch, I was like, are they taking the body to go eat it? Like, I didn't know, because I was like, I think this is all like potentially like in fair game. Like I didn't know where it was going, but it happens very quickly. And it was one of those, I just put up my hands. I was like, you know what? This is a different world. People are like the ledger. I can't read the writing, but the ledger is just going left and right.
Absolutely.
So we then see Thorne ride the sanitation van home. Good foreshadowing. Make sure that we know about that later on. And we see the most sumptuous unveiling of the least sumptuous food in the history of movies. Again, thinking about, I was talking before, like if you have a dystopia, then you kind of need a utopia. And fresh food here seems to be numero uno. Like, how do you place that? Like either when this is as film coming out or like how it reads now?
I feel like, for me, there's two things there. So one, and it's one of the reasons I love this movie too, is it like, I feel like it does deal with food culture in some way. And like, we're coming out of, right, the 1950s and 60s where we start to see like much more mass production of food, right? And there's TV dinners and there's all these things that are going to make cooking supposedly quicker and easier, but it's not going to have any taste, right? So then we have to add additives to it. And you see, right, like there's all of a sudden, especially with some of the social and political movements that are happening around that time, right, where people are starting to think about cooking and food more, right, and thinking about food preparation. And I think that obviously dovetails really well with like the environmental concerns and the overpopulation concerns that are happening at that time too, because food ends up being the thing, right? Like, we could have lots of people living in lots of places crammed against each other if we had food for all of them, right? We often don't have food to feed people in that case. And so that's like the number one thing that we have to think about, right, with overpopulation is how are we going to feed people, right? And we also see things like, more food distribution throughout the world, thinking about something like, the Nigerian Civil War, where the United States at the end of the 60s, right, is actually sending food to Nigeria because people are starving and eating dirt, and that really becomes an issue. So food, like, I feel like food is in the zeitgeist at this particular moment in time too. And
Mhm.
there's, I think, a shift away from a kind of quick and convenience of food culture and thinking a little bit more purposefully about our food. And I feel like the movie really does both of those things simultaneously, right? Like, so when I was reading a little bit about the book that it's based on, because I was like, where does this Soylent thing come from? So the book's apparently very, very different. Make room, make room. And so Soylent in the book is actually a steak that's made of soy and lentils. It's not this kind of like pre-processed little cracker like it is in the movie. Um, and so, which sounds pretty horrible anyway, a soy and lentil steak. But
Sounds like my Morning Star, like,
I know, it's
freezer.
exactly. I mean, it's kind of what we eat now anyway, right? As we move
Yeah.
away. So it feels prescient in that way, in that it's like talking about, food culture, and it's actually, the food culture we're living. I don't know if you've seen that like drink that came out last year that's a meal replacement drink that's called Soylent.
Oh gosh.
Like, I was like, did you all not watch the movie? Chocolate Soylent, vanilla Soylent, strawberry Soylent.
Mint Soylent. That's going to be the tough sell.
So I don't know. All of these things are really interesting to me about that sort of aspect of the movie and food culture. And I don't know. I feel like the movie doesn't maybe even come down sort of on a way it wants us to think about that, but at least wants us to think about, you know, scarcity of food and what kind of food we're eating.
Yeah, and it's interesting too to think of it in after we've gone through the kind of like the foodie moment, which is like the bougie appropriation of what's going on in this moment, that I think people are going to like. This has both like the class and the approach to food that seems right for the moment.
Absolutely, right? Because that's, I mean, that's one of the things that we're talking about, right? The kinds of food that you can get if you have less money are not fresh foods, right? I mean, in some ways, our world's really caught up with the movie nicely. Less and less people who are, lower on the socioeconomic ladder have access, availability, or money to, fresh food.
Yeah, and if you look at like the calories that your dollar buys you,
Oh yeah.
right, you're going to go the Demolition Man route. Like
Restaurants, Taco Bell. Yeah.
get your money's worth. And so and now that people are talking now today about like the return of Victory Gardens, and
Mhm.
I was like, well, we got a film to show you folks.
I know. I had totally forgotten this was set in 2022. And as I was rewatching it, I was like, this cuts a little close to the bone right now. Even the masks everybody's wearing, I was like, oh God.
It's funny that like now a lot of people are saying like, this isn't, a week to week, it's a month, and it's really about the long game. I'm like, oh yeah, if we do 18 months, it's 2022. Oh.
Right. So get ready for chocolate Soylent.
So getting back into the noir elements, we see the police station. It's interesting that this world is, there are flare-ups and riots, but the extras and the people tend to be pretty docile. But the police are still hard-boiled in
Oh yeah.
keeping with it. I think how Thorne gets really proud about cracking this case when it wasn't that tough to crack.
It was like two things he had to find out.
Yeah. The alarm went off for the first time in 2 years, and this was clearly a murder. Okay. We do get the drop. We get the furniture, which we'll talk about a little bit, referred to as grapefruit. I don't know what it means, but I kind of want to bring grapefruit into. I don't
No. Wasn't it weird? I mean, I guess it was like a reference to her anatomy, but then he's like, "You've never seen grapefruit." Like it was like,
Yeah. Well, that was at first I thought I had kind of forgotten about the use of furniture. So I thought he was literally saying like they had cool couches. I was like, they got that grapefruit furniture. um, and then we see some of the essentially bread lines. I don't know what else to call them. So the green lines.
yeah.
Um, the reading this movie, does this feel like a heavily anti-communistic movie to you?
I don't know. And I think that's maybe like one of the reasons it like it's a bad movie. I think that it
Or a good one? Like it might
yeah,
be dodging it.
yeah, I mean, I don't feel like they have a specific message even, you know. I don't feel like they even come out sort of hard against cannibalism. I mean, you know, I don't feel like they're taking a hard line on anything, you know. You think about the ends of like Planet of the Apes, right? You know, and there's a real hard line message there about like what humans have done to the world. But I feel like this kind of shirks that in a way. Like it doesn't really want to, you know, sort of um come out in favor or against communism. I mean, there is obviously an indictment of capitalism. I think that that's pretty clear. I think that
Mhm.
you know, there's that great. I don't know if you've. I think have we gotten to it yet? No. Where Cheryl, you know, meets her new owner.
Oh no, no, no. Yeah.
You know, there is this idea of like I've waited 2 years to get into. You know, that he comes off as really kind of scummy and like so there is like this idea, you know, that the 1%, you know, um, are sort of fundamentally evil, right? And the one person who potentially had a conscience is murdered pretty swiftly and quickly. And no one seems terribly upset. I mean, there's sort of this investigation to the Soylent issue, but there's no one seems terribly upset he's dead, right? Even Cheryl, it's just kind of like, well, he was a nice guy, but he's dead now, you know? And so um and that that seems to be an indictment against capitalism too, right?
Hmm.
This idea of like, well, you can, you know, you're a person, but when you get in the way of the machine of capitalism, you know, you'll be rubbed out unceremoniously.
Yeah, I think it was tough to like scrub out some of how the fact that communism and dystopia were so tied together that some of the images work that way.
Oh
But
yeah,
this is really squarely at the feet of capitalism, it seems like.
absolutely.
Um, um, a quick pop into Tad the bodyguard's house apartment because I do want to give a shout out to Paula Kelly.
Yes.
Who recently passed away. My favorite public defender on Night Court. She was amazing. And that robe is, that's a good look for her.
It is a good look. She's killing
Uh,
it.
we then get to the Saul Thorne meal. I have a old friend Ellen who always talked about hating when people would eat in movies and enjoy it. Like it really, it's like I understand where she's coming from. But that meal is so pleasurable and so shared.
And
Um, what's that?
it's more sensual than the sex scene is with Cheryl. I mean,
Yeah,
it's absolutely like intimacy between them.
yeah. It's great that they are willing that Thorne gets so much delight in sharing with Saul.
Yes.
That he likes being the provider, and that Saul is like emotes and shows his pleasure as like return. Um, that was a good meal.
I I think that's it's really interesting these like moments where um and I guess this sort of speaks to our current moment too, these moments where there's like this desire for human connection, right? You know, you have these women who are called furniture that there's no emotional connection to. You have people that you basically step over to get to your apartment, but there is at the same time like the most sort of fundamental of human desire to sit down and eat together.
Hmm. Yeah, and the pleasurable moment, like some of the like Thorne and Cheryl's like at their happiest is like, well, it could be, there could be a romantic angle too, but just showering together, like,
Yeah.
yeah,
They're
like
like
that.
laughing hysterically. Oh, hot water.
Yeah.
Like,
And I love that shower because it looks like the tumbler cups at my parents' old bar set. And the next scene is interesting because we go from, well, first of all, there's a lot of hopping between the apartment to Simonson's apartment. And whenever I show up at like Simonson's after being somewhere else, I'm like, how could you have this? But then when it's time to leave, I'm like, I don't want to go.
I know, right?
A chore.
Because it's so hot outside.
Oh, right. Yeah. So hot, you're wearing 9 layers of clothes.
It's probably the most upsetting thing in the movie. I don't know why there's people in turtlenecks and sweaters and jackets. I mean, it's like 11 o'clock. It's like, it's 90 degrees outside. And I'm like, why do you have a members only jacket on then? Take it off.
It's standard NYPD issue in the 2020s. Then we get, Thorne goes back into the apartment, and there we see the full set of furniture. And this is, I think, a good time to unpack some of the gender things that are happening in the movie, like through this scene. What it pulled out for you, what it said, what it didn't say.
I just feel like this movie, again, if we're sort of thinking, that the new world or change of world comes, at the time the movie came out around 72 or 73, where the world begins to change, so that it's fundamentally changed by 2022. It really seems to not acknowledge the women's movement. It doesn't seem to acknowledge feminism. It doesn't seem to acknowledge reproductive justice or Roe v. Wade or like any of these things that were, on the horizon at the time in terms of things that might undermine moving the world in this direction, which makes sense. It's a movie, right? But at the same time, it seems to sort of cast women in a role that is really, very conventional, right? They're the only women we actually really see, other than sort of in the background working, are furniture. I mean, we don't really see a wife or a sister, or that there's these sort of hordes of women on the street, but there's not any inclination that women have much agency at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, we see a moment where they have pleasure with one another.
Sure.
But that, like, once a male figure enters in, like, record scratch, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Which makes sense given, how they're treated by Charles in that kind of jockey outfit. But
well, the production scene is so bizarre, right? I mean, they both seem to understand what's happening, but there's no like discussion or of like why or how or what. It's just very perfunctory. I mean, there's literally less emotion in that scene than there is in the murder scene,
Yeah, I thought it was like he was playing it in a way. He was like waiting to get her information out of her. Mm-hmm. So when he's sitting there in 90-degree weather, sweaty, and a mohair oversized armchair, grossest part of a gross movie. And then and then moves to the satin sheet. It was too many textures for a sweaty body. But I got the impression, okay, there will be some other game afoot. Like the noir elements will come out, like levels of relationships.
Right.
No.
But that didn't happen. And it's a weird thing. It's like she's like, they have sex one time. She's like, I'm in love. Sign me up for your sweaty apartment where you walk over people. That's the life I want.
Yeah. And when she wants it, he doesn't want to give it.
No.
like after she's like, we can do it again. He's like, no. She's like, we can take a bath. He's like, yeah.
Yeah. He's like, I got a roommate situation that I can't get into right now.
Gotta get back to Saul, you know. And even even down to, I mean, the costuming in this film is interesting. Literally not a print in the entire movie.
Oh.
And all of the women, I mean, because they are trying to say something through their uniformity, but they do, in their own way, just like strip them down again by giving them jewel tones.
Oh, but those dresses that the furniture has, they're killing. They're like super 70s, like flowy, like
Yeah. And it was definitely like the pattern book. Like,
yeah.
They got all 12 of like the same books. Like, oh, put a trumpet sleeve on it.
Yes.
Like, give them all collars. Height. More fabric in this hot summer.
I don't understand the costume designers' choices. They're so upsetting to me. When I saw the turtleneck with the jacket over it, I really was like, what are you doing? You don't have air conditioning in your office. You've made that abundantly clear.
From there, we hop into meet Father Paul, I think Father Paul, who had received the confession of Simonson and is, again, as you're saying, someone who has information that's not written down. It's the human safe that needs to be cracked. He's not that good with the confessional confidentiality. He's just like, come back, I'll tell you later.
Yeah.
I'm pretty hazy on what this film is or isn't saying on religion, and maybe there's just not much there. Did you have any like takeaways?
No, I mean it's it's interesting that like again this religious man who's probably seen the worst of what this world looks like, that cannibalism is the thing that beats him down, right? But he's like, and I'm not quite sure what to make of that. Not that cannibalism is not horrifying, but why is that the thing that breaks him? I mean, there's a dead mother lying on the steps of the church with a child with a rope strapped to her arm, and that's like just another Tuesday. Like,
Green Tuesday.
Yeah, it's Soylent Day. What did you expect? Another dead mother on the steps of the church. So that's nothing, right? And so I don't know what it's saying about, I mean, I don't know, maybe it's, he has a Nietzsche moment there where he's like, God is dead. People are eating each other. I can't, how can I even be, hold out hope anymore? But I don't know what the film's really trying to say about the nature of religion in this world. And Simonson, right? Doesn't Cheryl say Simonson took her to church, which is where he made his confession, but took her to church a few times before, so something about this idea of cannibalism moves him back towards religion in some way, that I also don't really know what to make of.
Yeah. If you are listening along and have comments in the chat, happy to hear them and fill us in. We get some of the standard noir plot thickeners. We see the lieutenant's part of the cover-up. We see Father Paul assassinated with I thought it was the No Country for Old Men cattle prod thing at first.
It's a gun with a silencer on it, right?
Yeah, they had like an electronic. It was I just thought, anyway, I did not understand what that was and had to go back and watch the scene.
I have to tell you, I love that image so much because he's literally just leaning his head against the confessional, like, please do this now. Like, I cannot be here another day.
Yeah, it's its own, I mean, there are moments of, with everyone who becomes aware of it, that there are these mercy killings.
Yeah.
And that is part of the trifecta. We get a riot. About time we get some scoops of the scoops.
Scoops.
I have friends who have nightmares about the scoops still. Were they unsettling for you? Were they like, how did they read?
No, I thought of all kinds of uses for them, like clearing the way out after concerts. Like, I feel like we are not looking into scoop technology in a serious and concrete way, in a way that could be helpful. But I don't know. They're sort of an odd thing. Like, what happens when you get scooped up? They're like, do they just let you back out on the street, or like, do you get taken
I
to
think I
wait?
think you get greened.
Okay, you get
I
green.
I assumed. I mean, that was my I mean, that's how I read it. In fact, like that's what I was like, oh, okay, here's where this is how it's gonna
Tuesday
play out.
Soylent is coming from. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that it's so interesting that that sweet little baby faced hitman gets crushed under the scoops after, he attempts to shoot Thorne. But it's like, I don't know. It's like the movie had to kill him accidentally. Like they couldn't. There's no, because there seems to be like no malicious in his murder in some way. Like they have to just kind of get rid of him in a way that's accidental.
Yeah, and hyper violent. Like that's
Hyper violent.
as kills go. That's a great kill. Like it's
Oh
an
yeah.
amazing kill.
Oh yeah.
Um, and yeah, and he is though. I mean, he's killing a lot of bystanders. So
Yeah, he's not a great shot, right? For somebody who's doing this for money, like he's not excellent at his job. He's just okay-ish.
Tad's not a great shot either. So
No, nobody seems to be able to shoot.
yeah. So Todd, there's a shakedown of Tad by Thorne. Yeah, another jarring like violence against women scene.
Yeah, what do you make of that sort of thing where he's like, I can't touch the police, but then like, I mean, I wasn't sure like how to read that particular moment.
It's I part of it for me. I was like, oh, okay. If they are in, there are spaces where he can't, like police must have this protection in some forms. Clearly not in riots.
No.
Or if it is, if you're of a certain class, you are susceptible to certain laws. Like
Right.
this would be something that would be enforced against people. It's like the old dueling laws. Like they're
Right.
for a certain level of person. And so him saying like ascribing to that law set, I was like, well, maybe he's amping himself up.
Which is kind of fascinating, right? That, and that's like an interesting dichotomy in this film, right? This sort of sense of rules and lawlessness that people feel like they have to ascribe to, but then the sort of lawlessness of the world and society, those two things sort of live alongside each other in such an interesting way.
Yeah. And that's one of those weird moments where you get a glimpse into a world, a sci-fi world that they didn't really build. So you're like, I guess that's the rule.
Yeah. That's the rule now. Yeah.
And if it's just a justification for like, oh, we don't want the big end duel at this point.
Right.
Narratively, it's okay. We need to ice it for later. So
Charlton Heston had something in his contract where he couldn't mess up his face unless it was in shadow.
From there, we go to, well, I'm thinking of shadows, a very shadowy library, a very messy library too. And which I guess is some just like, comment about the state of information. It's interesting though, they have these, in looking at the back wall and you see these things labeled like 1996, 1997, and you're like, oh, that would be me seeing 2050. But
right.
Now it's like, oh, that's way back with like Titanic.
Right.
It was a weird midpoint going backwards.
I love that scene though. It's like such a good one because like everybody, all the books, right, are old people, right? And again, this idea of like, knowledge and the transmission of knowledge as dying off, right? That the people who hold this knowledge of the world before are old and are the elderly, and those are the only people who hold that knowledge, because it's not, and what does it say on the door? It's something like approved books only, or so the idea that you have to be approved. And I thought it was fascinating that they chose an actress in that scene who has a German accent.
Yeah, there's definitely there is a Jewish community element to knowledge in New York City. And that also it gives tones of, okay, this is those who are aware of like the Holocaust moments where you have Saul saying, is there a God in this space? Like, it's like,
Right.
oh, we see this is a Holocaust film trope. And so they did, yeah, who they chose as oracles in that library is fascinating. And did you, at this point, we start to see awareness of the Soylent Green mystery unraveling. Did you like how they were coy about it? How they kind of give you little pieces?
I think it's such an interesting question, right? Because we're seeing the movie that's like so much a part of like our entire lives, right? Part of popular culture. I mean, before I saw the movie, I'd heard that phrase, Soylent Green is people, so many times. I mean, I
You'd
didn't.
seen it before you saw it. Yeah.
Yeah, right. And so,
Yeah.
like, in some ways, like when that reveal happens in the film, it's not necessarily a shock because you kind of know it's coming. And I would like be curious to see like people who saw that, fresh sort of in the theater or something, if that sort of withholding, yeah, was just an explosion for them. Because we get to that scene and you see he's shell shocked, right? Because they've revealed this information to him and he doesn't really know what to make of it. And so like as the rest of those moments unfold, they sort of make perfect sense to us, right? Because like the priest, like Simonson, he's got this information now and he's hopeless, right? No more will to live. But I think that I don't know. I don't know how to kind of read that, because it wasn't a problem for me because I kind of knew what was coming in some small way. And so I would be curious to hear like, what reviewers at the time said
Mm-hmm.
about that sort of withholding.
Mm-hmm. And then we get a really powerful, campy, I mean, it is pulling out all of the crayons when Saul goes home, which we learn what that means. He shows up, and I like how the greeters had those. In the 80s, would you do those pads where it was like contact and you would write on it and then you would pull the
Yeah.
like, that's how they're doing their medical records?
I know.
I
They're
guess
like,
at a pinch.
it doesn't matter. You're going to be away for like 30, 40 minutes. So, like,
Oh, that's what your favorite color is orange? It was orange.
yeah. I swear that absolutely looks like a ride at Epcot, though. I mean, it's like the dome shape and then the lines and like,
yeah. They ask, so, I mean, in putting things in today's context, so I end up talking to a lot of people about like end of life rights and things like that and how you should structure your will. And it's interesting because people do have these death wish lists where, I would like to be treated in this way, but it gets down to minutia, just like play this song, do these kinds of things for me. And so the fact that when he's like classical, light classical, I got so nervous because I was like, if people are like, what music to play? I was like, alternative.
yeah. Could you play some REM? Like,
but it's so vague. Like, what would you get? What would you? I mean, the lack of control. And then we get the big moment, the Epcot ride. And what popped for you? Everything.
I mean, it's sort of beautiful. I mean, like, it's a real powerful case for assisted death. I mean, he goes in, he's like 20 minutes, right? And they're like, oh yeah, 20 minutes. And, he drinks his nice little drink and he gets in the comfy bed. And like, then there's beautiful pictures and beautiful music. And like, I don't know, that it seems lovely. I it's dark, I know, but it's like when you see the rest of the movie, right, where people again are dying on the steps of a church, are being bludgeoned by the scoop, the scooper, like, I mean, that's like, those are much more unpleasant ways to die. I mean, his death, or being shot in the confessional, that's going in this, sort of beautiful white spaceship death vessel is, a much nicer way to go, and he chooses when to go.
Mhm.
um I kind of wonder if that's not one of the sort of arguments that the film is making, like, this is how we solve the overpopulation problem: let people choose when to go so that they don't die on the steps of a church,
Mhm.
um which is dark, but they certainly make it seem like something really pleasant.
Yeah, it's interesting because at one end, this could be read as um, anti euthanasia because, oh, the government just wants to get rid of you to turn you into food. But the other time, it's very like pro compassionate, like death. Like it has a sweet element to it. And that combination mixed in with Dick Van Patten makes it really hard to read.
I was so excited to see him. I was like, thank God for I mean, I don't know that they mean that scene to be read as humorous, but the second I see him, I'm gonna laugh. I mean,
Of course, of course. And I also thought, part of me, because I'm like, as I'm watching this, because it was my first time watching, I was like, oh, is this their way of like tenderizing humans so they make better food? Like a way to soften them up or give them like to die, like the way like they try and give peaceful endings to animals who they consume.
yeah, so
And
they taste better.
but the fact that returning to the relationship between Thorne and Saul, um, that that confessional as like how it works as a plot device, how it plays out was so good for me.
Oh,
The
yeah. Well, it's funny because that scene almost reads like a rom-com or something, right? He's got a bullet hole in his leg and he's running, to this place so that he can see Saul for the last time, right? And it's almost like, like a plane taking off in a romantic comedy or something, right? That he's at the window and he's looking at him and, I see you, I love you,
Yeah, and they pull back. They make like they make a concession that would be made for family by letting him see this moment, um, which is I suppose not allowed because you're not supposed to be able to see the ocean or get up your hope or whatever. But a nice concession made by Van Patten, and
moment of real privacy between them that even the audience is not allowed to share, right? Where the technology starts acting up and he's got to put the headphones on, right, to hear this confession from him about the Soylent, and we see his mouth move but we don't hear what he's saying to
Mhm.
Thorne through the headphones.
And I think, and I apologize if this isn't correct because I was going off of something else, but I think Edward Gene Robinson died the night after filming this scene.
Really? Oh my God, I know this was his last movie. I didn't.
Yeah, I think it was like this. All to say, he was at. I mean, he had lost a lot of his faculties, his hearing, and for him to then be acting in that, like looking at movies which were his livelihood, giving him comfort at his death.
Oh, I know.
It's it's a
Beautiful.
heavy, yeah, beautiful scene.
What did you think of all the images that they chose to show in those last moments?
Um, that like Getty stock footage. I liked it, in part because I liked that it wasn't that it felt like corporate, but was still effective. Like
Right.
it wasn't personalized. It was, hey, here is mass consumption of pretty pictures, which is what movies are in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the fact that it did kind of look like oh, I ordered this online and had it printed on a canvas picture of tulips. It's like, yeah, that's about what it would be, but it's still effective. Like, you know, it doesn't matter that, but maybe there's, I mean, if you look at that viewpoint toward like food or whatnot, maybe there is something they're saying negatively, but it definitely worked for me.
You know, and I kind of love that. I hadn't thought about that, that it's like a very corporate death and that it is like sort of like canvas stock footage, but it's like that's kind of what it would be, right? If corporations were controlling it, right? You would choose from the, you know, 90s alternative package and pictures of mountainsides, you know, and like that's the package I'm gonna get. Like, and so it sort of, while like beautiful, is like also kind of a critique of like the idea of like corporatizing death too, right?
Yeah, but on the other end of it, it's the idea that, you know, we have to be more comfortable with non-customized things, right?
Yeah,
Like that's something the world, or, you know, or particularly our culture will need to embrace in a lot of ways. Like, I
absolutely.
need to take what everyone else is taking and then make it myself. But like the fact that there is beauty in it, I pulled up something positive from it. So
Which is sort of antithetical to what our culture, the direction our culture has been moving into, which is like artisanal everything, right? Like I have this very special cupcake, only three of them were made. And so I'm going to consume this thing that there's only three of and you can't have any, you know?
mhm.
And that's, you know, this is like an interesting sort of move away from that.
Yeah, that, and if you can, and part of it is like other people doing it for you. So yeah, it's artisanal because other people made it. Like I could make it for myself and avoid mass consumption,
Right.
and it may not be as good, but that's gonna have to, we're gonna have to deal with some ready to wear for a while. So then we get the ending. There's a chase scene, um, which is very interesting. Well, first of all, we get well, we have a chase scene that takes us through the factory. Um, no dialogue spoken. I think there was some contractual issues why that was. They
Hmm.
wanted to limit the fact that this would feel like a French Connection, or like they wanted to just strip the dialogue from it. But he hops out of the Soylent Green factory, now aware of what's going on, rides a jump truck because we know he knows how to do that. Calls up Cheryl, gives a long and heartfelt goodbye.
Have a good life as furniture, baby. Like,
Yeah. See ya, would want to be ya, but bye. And then our ending confrontation, it's interesting for me, like the height of the film is the home ceremony.
yeah.
Um, but the ending confrontation goes, and obviously there are elements of noir and Western that combine and mix, but this feels very Western to me. We're in an alley, it's a shootout, we're in a cemetery, we're in a church. Like, that cemetery that is nowhere in New York City. Like,
Especially not if the city's overpopulated. They're not taking up that space for cemetery space. Absolutely not.
with a
Like,
staircase and 19 families can live on it.
exactly. Why is nobody sleeping in the very cozy cemetery then? Like,
Right. It's too hot. It's too hot under these wool jackets outside. Um, and then we get the big moment. Does it deliver?
well, I felt like though that shootout actually went on like a couple beats too long. But now that you're saying all the locations of it, I'm thinking too about like how very sort of American those locations are and like emblematic of the Western, right? Like, you know, the alley, the church, that like those are sort of the tropes of like the American Western in some way, right? And maybe that's what it's killing, right? Like this idea of the American dream and manifest destiny, and you know, I mean that this is done. Like we're not moving in that direction anymore. You know, there's going to be something bleaker on the other side of that. I kind of I kind of hate that that last shootout happens with like the poor starving people in the church, and like they're just, randomly shooting up these poor people. But
Like the riot, they are the stray bullets. You know, they get the spray.
well, and I hadn't really thought about this before, but it's an interesting movie in that way, right? That it's centered around this idea of a murder investigation. When there's like 800 people murdered in the movie, why are we fixated on this one person? Well, money, right? I mean, again, sort of an indictment of whose life matters, right? It's not he doesn't stop and find out the name of the mother with who's dead on the steps of the church, right? He's busy trying to solve Simonson's murder, which is ironic too, that you would step over a body to go question a priest about another. I mean, it's sort of an odd kind of thing, right? That it's centered around, which is like a very noir thing, right? Centered around like this murder, but there's so many other murders.
And the lieutenant makes that case.
Yeah.
He's like, when he corruptly trying to close it, he's like, there's a lot going on, get over it.
Yeah. Why are you fixated on this one murder?
And it gets to the injustice element that, he's, as some amazing detective, like has the scent and he's going to track it down at all costs. So, but then we get the final fight with Tad and the reveal.
Yeah.
Does it work?
No.
Okay, why not?
Because it doesn't matter. And then we kind of have to, I mean, I guess it gets to the sort of like cathartic, like Aristotelian question of like why we watch, like something has to change, right? There has to be a new equilibrium on the other side of this. And I don't know that there is. Like, we've learned something about this dystopian future, but I don't have any sense like they're really gonna change this. I mean, there's 5 or 6 people now, and probably many more who know that Soylent Green is people, right? So does it make a difference him yelling this out in front of an audience? No, I don't think so. I think tomorrow is Soylent Tuesday, and everybody's going to line up and get their Soylent Green and think it tastes delicious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is where if we were philologists and like knew like, oh, this is how it played, it just, because we know that shock, I guess, doesn't rip open like, oh, corporations are nefarious,
right?
The way it's hoping you, like the wall it's expecting you to have,
right?
Just doesn't quite come. But yeah, I was surprised personally. I was like, okay, how's it gonna happen? How's it gonna happen? And that happens, and then we're done.
Yeah. And I guess that's what it is. Is it a message or is it a movie? And that's to me like where I think some of its failings are as a film, is that like and I love the review that you read because it's got a ton of interesting stuff in it, but I don't know if it works as a movie. And I say that really like
Yeah. Well, flawed movies make for some of the best. So
yeah.
well, quickly, if we're going to do, just thinking about, okay, how would we rework this for today? I wanted to do, get your insight on how you would, and people who are reading along, listening along, feel free to put in your thoughts as well. We're going to go ahead and recast it for today. So, who is your new Detective Thorne?
Matthew McConaughey.
Yeah.
It feels right, doesn't it?
True detective energy.
Yeah, he's got something like, I don't know. It felt like I thought, who would it be? And his is the first name that popped into my head, and it felt right.
So opposite McConaughey, who's his Saul?
Okay. Unpopular choice here. He's also older than I thought, though, so I feel okay about my choice. Michael Keaton.
Oh, interesting.
It felt right.
It does feel good. It can be world weary. is loving, will appreciate that steak.
Yes. I also feel like he's like got like a connection to a bygone era of movies in some ways that like, are popular still, but like he's not maybe in fighting shape like he used to be.
Hmm. He got the, I mean, he had his, well, and that would be the next like hit after Birdman, right?
Right.
Like, okay, you've done your Birdman, now you do your Saul,
Now
and then you go home.
I mean, look, he would be like a younger, hipper Saul, but I didn't realize he was 68. I, for some reason, had Michael Keaton as a little younger in my head, but
Looking good, Mike.
I know, he looks good.
And your new Cheryl.
Margot Robbie.
Okay. You're opening up the checkbook. You are getting a glam cast.
Oh, no. Like it's going to be a spendy movie.
Your new lieutenant.
Okay, that was a really, really hard one for me. There's a couple of people who I thought might be interesting. One was Timothy Oliphant. Maybe.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not, committed to him. Sam Rockwell, maybe.
Yeah.
Would also be a choice.
A hard-boiled
sort of, there was other people I thought, but like they had too kind eyes and like
you have to have scruff or something for that role, right?
You have scruff. You have to have a little bit of scruff.
Who do you got as your governor? Sorry.
Idris Elba would make like a good Simonson. I feel like he's got tragedy all over his face.
He would be amazing.
Bank on this movie, but like,
hey Idris, fly in. We need you for 4 minutes.
I know. He's so good. He does like that sad face so well. Like,
yeah, and I could see him like going to church, and in a blue velvet suit.
I think he would look awesome in a blue velvet suit. I'm actively excited about the prospects.
Who is your new Governor Santini?
Okay, that one I really, really struggled with. I thought maybe Michael Douglas, maybe Richard Gere.
Okay. Yeah, I think like everyone has Oscar nominations in this movie.
I know.
If not Oscars.
I know. It's an award-winning cast.
The preview would be nominee, winner.
I know.
And for the beleaguered Father Paul?
Edward Norton.
A riff on Primal Fear?
Kind of, right? Like, I just, maybe that's a toe over the line, but I also felt like he does, I feel like Simonson and like Father Paul both need to be like people who can do good, like sad sack faces. And so I feel like Idris Elba and Edward Norton both give good sad sack face.
Yeah, he can hang dog and he's a nice guy, right?
Like, he's a nice guy, right?
The bodyguard, Tad Fielding, and his paramour, Martha.
Okay. The bodyguard, I thought John Cena. Look, he can't act.
This movie.
This movie. So I feel like that would be a good role for him.
You can do it.
Be a bruiser, so
even when you need someone who can't act, you find the highest dollar actor.
Oh, I did. I told you. I spent all my money.
And who's this Martha?
Zoe Kravitz.
Yeah.
It's not so
good.
It's way too expensive.
So good. Two left. The hitman with the heart of gold.
Dave Franco.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of somebody with a really sweet baby face. Who I also feel like could murder.
Yeah, he's got a little bit of evil to him.
Dave Franco felt like the right choice.
And lastly, who is reprising the role of Dick Van Patten's Usher, who opens the screen for Thorne?
Okay, I went with a character actor here finally. Rich Summer.
Oh, there you go.
He's the only one not making money on this movie.
I love it. I love it. I think that high budget, high name movies are going to get made a lot in this climate. So we can just greenline it right now. Okay, Dionne.
Made like in my backyard with like my phone and like 3 rocks. Like
New York looks a lot like Georgia, but
you know, the red New York clay. The famous red New York clay.
Okay, to close out, Dionne, I don't know if you're aware, but Proust had a younger sister named Becky who developed a 5-question questionnaire to determine whether or not if you love movies. Do you care to take our questionnaire? No, excuse me. Do you care to take Becky Proust questionnaire?
Becky, bring it on.
Okay.
Did you like Oreos as opposed to Madeleine's?
Yeah. Yeah, that's Becky's. That's how she goes. The black Soylent black and white. So question 1, what was your first R-rated movie?
So I was babysitting when I was 12, and the people I was babysitting for had cable, and I watched The Doors. I was too young to see that particular film.
That's a rough entry.
A lot of it. Didn't understand most of it. It was very confusing to me. And I grew up in Canada, so like especially confusing to me.
Yeah, it's funny that it was a toss-up between Val Kilmer and Michael Keaton, a couple Batmans for the role of Saul, and maybe past blockages got in the way. I forgot to put on my social science glasses, by the way. Excuse me. That I don't know if that first question will be scientifically valid or not. We will see. Okay, the movie you would be compelled to buy, even though you may already own a copy, if you found it at Pickers Paradise for $2.
Okay, I do not own a copy of this movie. I am desperate to own a copy because it is one of the weirdest movies I've ever seen in my life. That's like a big Hollywood big budget movie, not like a indie art film. So I watched it like growing up several hundred times probably, because it was one of those movies that they used to play on HBO constantly in the 90s. And it was called I'll Do Anything. It was with Nick Nolte. Remember that movie? It's so weird. And it was like supposed to be a musical, but then they cut all the musical numbers. So the movie's just like stilted in really weird ways, but there's also sometimes a singing scene that happens that comes apropos of nothing. I mean, it's such a bizarre movie. And I just would like to see it again because I feel like it would be even weirder on
the best movie to watch on a second date.
So I think for a second date, you have to see if your second date has a sense of humor or not. And that's like the litmus test, right, for the second date. Otherwise, why are you going out with them? So for me, like it would have to be a barometer for like my weird sense of humor. So it would have to be like Fargo or Beverly Hills Cop or Harold and Maude. I know Beverly Hills Cop.
You know, one all the same sense of humor in each.
Right. I contain multitudes. I find The Jerk as funny as Fargo.
Good. Okay. Sub question A, your favorite type of pizza.
Veggie pizza.
And the best movie to eat on the couch with a veggie pizza.
Clute.
Got it. Lastly.
Kind of on brand, right? Noir, kind of going with our swim.
Oh, no, yeah, it totally it fits. Okay, you are 10 years old and receive a screener from the future. What film most blows your mind?
Without a doubt, Pulp Fiction. Saw it when I was 15, saw it the day it came out. Had to have my best friend Kata buy a ticket for me because I was underage. Couldn't see an R-rated movie. But there's life
Seen
before.
one already. You'd seen that. You'd seen The Doors. What else was left?
Didn't understand a lot of the stuff that was happening in The Doors. Did understand a lot of the stuff that was happening in Pulp Fiction, and was like, mind was blown by it. Like, I was like, this is a movie? Like, I was like, I need to see it 15 more times. So
Nice. Well, one second. I have to. I have my TI 83. Beep bop beep bop beep. Hey, turns out you love movies. And we loved having you here on Zoom back camera.
Thank you so much for having me.
One more moment. Tell us again, what is the name of your upcoming book, and when can people find it, or when will people?
It is called Quint. It is historical fiction. It is telling the fictionalized story of a true story of the world's first surviving natural born set of quintuplets who were born in Canada in the 30s, and the Canadian government built a theme park around them in Northern Ontario, where you could come and look at the quints, bathe and dress and play. So that's the basis for the novel, and it'll be out in February 2021 from 713 Books.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dionne. And we hope that you join us throughout the week here on Zoom Back Camera. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ricky. Good night.
Thank you.